transitions are important that you go through them slowly because they have something for you that you need in the next iteration. And if you go too fast, you miss that. You miss what you need and you'll return back.
I'll have what she's having.
Welcome to another edition of
She Talks Confidence
podcast.
Welcome back. It's Tony. This is the She Talks Confidence podcast. This week, another amazing guest, author, speaker, coach. And what we're going to talk about today is habit coach, right? And there's a specific certification you have, but it's Amy Kemp. Amy, how are you?
So good. Excited for the conversation.
I can't wait, especially due to the fact that the specific thing you deal with, your specialty, your expertise is on habits. And habits are so important in restructuring not only your automatic negative thought patterns to positive functional thought patterns, especially when it comes to confidence and women's confidence, but also how that continues on and manifests into your behavior, your outside behavior, and the way you set your life up so it's set up for success and you're not struggling and dealing with the issues you're dealing with right now. Amy, can you go through a little bit of background? I'd like to hear how you got to the point where you are clarify, a certified habit
finder coach is the official
habit finder
title.
coach. That's it, which is fascinating. I've never heard of that. So can you go through how you got there?
Absolutely. For over 20 years, I built an enormous sales organization that was over 1,000 people across the nation. And during that time, I worked with a million different coaches, did a million different assessments, and I loved the personal development space. Along that journey, the one tool and coach that I worked with that had the most significant impact on the growth of my business was a habit finder coach who used this tool called the Habit Finder. And then there's the curriculum that goes along with it. I was not dreaming of becoming a habit finder coach. And I will teasingly say that I started this business completely by accident, did not even really know I was starting a business. I just had many connections with women who were isolated, exhausted by the demands of their work and home lives and the weight of what they were carrying. And I kept thinking if I could gather these women outside of my other business, just to scratch an itch and really connect them, something magical could happen. I went to Salt Lake City to speak at an event. That coach lives there. He had worked with a lot of people in my organization as well. And so he said, I think you need to take action. I think you need to do something with all of these women that you've been talking to. And then he said, on Monday, this was a Thursday, we're starting training for new habit finder coaches. And when I tell you, I had never considered it until that moment. It, honest to God truth. That being said, it made complete sense.
What spoke to you in that moment?
What they were dealing with was the same thing I had worked with him to overcome. And it was these subconscious habits of thinking. I didn't even know that they were happening. But once I started on the work with him, I quickly realized, oh, this is affecting everything. And I recognized that's actually what's holding these women back. It wasn't that they weren't smart enough. They didn't have the capacity. These are some of the most brilliant, accomplished, capable people I know. They weren't like at the beginning stages of their development either. They had done some things. They were further along down the line. And so that being said, started with 2 groups. The business exceeded my wildest expectations in its growth. And this is now my full-time work where I do this. I use this assessment tool and curriculum with clients.
I love it. I just love it because it's so important. The recognition of the thought patterns, the understanding that there's a ceiling, you've built this ceiling that you don't realize, especially with women and a lot of the subconscious. Obviously, it's programming. If it's not working for you in terms of your flow, it's because it was put there by somebody else or another system and that you lived in and you didn't even realize it, hence the subconscious thing. It doesn't matter if you're not successful or if you're very successful. You could be very successful as a woman in whatever field you happen to be an expertise at. And there's a chance that you're still hitting your head up against that ceiling that you've created that you didn't realize you've created,
Yeah.
which is what is
Yeah.
fascinating, isn't it?
And here's the thing, the core message of my book is that you can't outwork your thought habits. No matter how competent and capable you are, there comes a point where just working harder is not the answer to getting further.
But that's the adage that we've all, especially here in the States, that's it. It's about hard work and
Keep
nose
working
to the grindstone,
harder.
especially as a
Yes.
woman, because as a woman, you have to
Yes.
work twice as hard.
Yes. And you're also doing the vast majority of the unpaid labor in most households.
Yeah.
And so that's another just reality. My own experience that really was life changing around that was that I had built this huge business, very public facing, lots of recognition, lots of stages and microphones and whatnot. We met with our financial advisor, and I tell this story in the book. And my husband works in education. He's an assistant principal. He's amazing at that in that lane, but he's in a lane where his income is capped.
Mhm.
So I had filled out all the forms. I had prepared everything for this meeting with our financial advisor, who's a trusted friend also. And she had them all in front of her in a neat little pile. I remember what I was wearing. I remember the chair I was sitting on. I remember the sound of the air conditioning in the room. And she said, I've looked through everything. You've done a great job managing the money that you have. You're not doing anything crazy. There's not a lot of debt or anything. What you're doing with it is amazing. There's only one problem if you want to achieve the goals that you've outlined in this form that I had you fill out. And then she leaned forward on the paper and she looked at me and she said, "You're not making enough money."
Hmm.
And it felt like all the air left the room. I don't remember one more thing about that meeting. I don't know what else she said. But those words were so piercing to me because, and here's why. It wasn't just that I wasn't making enough money. It was that I knew with the ages of our kids at that time, I call it the Uber era of parenting, where nobody has a driver's license, but everybody's in things.
Mhm.
I had no capacity to work any more hours. I was already working full time. My husband, the only way he's making more money is by getting older in his lane. And I knew, oh, this falls on me and I can't just outwork it. I always before I could just work harder, sell more, grow the bit. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden it became very real that the answer to this problem wasn't working harder. I had to figure out what was happening at a subconscious level to create more income without more work.
It always takes a while to process out something like that because it's a very impactful thing, especially as you had
Yeah.
indicated. How
Hmm.
long did it take you to formulate a plan from there? And
Mm,
what helped you to formulate the plan?
that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. It wasn't immediate. I think I have good instincts when I get into a spot like that to reach out to people who can guide me. There were several coaches who helped me uncover what those habits of thinking were. I did not try to go it alone. The decisions and what transpired as a result was also a significant professional transition that a
Mhm.
lot of people misunderstood along the way. And I knew that was going to be the case. And working through the emotions of all of that, I had to get really quiet and very focused on just the decisions that were best for our family at that time, knowing that a lot of people would have judgment around it and a lot of strong feelings around my departure from one space and moving into another.
Mhm.
So the discovery of that was painfully slow.
Mhm. It is. It's a process
Mhm.
that so there's a couple things that need to happen in that space, and I'm thinking this is the case, but I'd like you to talk about that. The first
Mhm.
thing is having the confidence to be okay with the decision and to make that decision and to finally let go. It's
Mhm.
so hard when you've created something, but
Mhm.
then I always call it the hermit crab thing, where the
Mm.
hermit crab finds a shell that works for them, but if they start to grow, it becomes very uncomfortable and they need to find a new shell. But in the process of finding a new shell, you have to shed your old one and go out and be 100% vulnerable out there to the seagulls as you try to find your bigger shell. So that's the first huge thing you have to deal with, that every woman that I've ever worked with deals with, because they've come to me or they come to you or they go to a workshop,
Mhm.
and that's where they're at, right? They're hitting their head up and they're going, I need to do something. Finally, there's leverage
Mhm.
enough to where they're saying, I need to do something.
Yeah.
In that process, that it's such a huge thing. The second part, I'm assuming that you had a very good tribe, supportive tribe. Your husband was support. You need to have
Mm.
that though. If you didn't have that. So can you
Mm.
talk about how you got the confidence going, what in you made that work, and how important it is to have a very small, super supportive tribe, especially when the voices outside get really loud?
Yes. And I lost a lot of my tribe
Yeah.
in the transition.
Yeah.
And I knew that would be the case. I knew departing would also be a departure from people who had been important in my life, not because broken relationships or I was doing anything harmful, just more proximity, difference of perspective. I just knew that it would result in a huge significant shift. So I do I did have a couple of key people. That being said, I don't even think that I could have done it. I had to pay someone to be my coach during that time
Mhm.
because my husband was very scared along with me because it was his livelihood too that I was
Sure.
he was attached to my success in the other lane as well.
Mhm.
Not in a negative way, but just why are we blowing something up? This is good. Why are
Mm.
we why do we have to change this? He was understandably not fully understanding where I was going yet. I didn't even
Mm.
know.
Mhm.
So my safest place, I had to hire that. Everyone else had too much agenda, too much attachment to my decisions,
Yeah.
and I had to create a safe place where I could talk it through, where I knew that person was not attached to my outcome in any lane, but really just listening to where I was and helping me walk through it.
Mhm.
Maybe that was the instinct that served me well during that time, is that I had learned that from years past, to hire someone when things got rough and to always invest in that kind of space being held for me.
Yeah.
That instinct really served me well during the transition. I also wanted to hurry and get through it.
Mm.
And I've learned that transitions are important, that you go through them slowly because they have something for you. They have something for you that you need in the next iteration. And if you go too fast, you miss that. You miss what you need and you'll return back. And I had to go painfully slowly through the transition. It wasn't something that I could just wake up one day and then be done, though many days I wanted it to be done. And even now, 8 years later, I still sometimes am working through things from that season. It's not
Mhm.
over fully. I still have to pull things out and just reconcile them or feel them or let them go. So, yeah, transitions are such an important place for leaders, but we don't talk about them enough. We don't talk about the thing that I used to love now has become not a fit.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that to happen even, but
Yeah, but you don't,
it
and
happens.
then you hang on to those things, or you
Yes.
think that, man, I don't want to lose these people because this is the circle that I was in before, and they were supportive, but they were supportive in context, and doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people and they don't
No,
support you. It just means that they don't get it, right? It's because you're
totally.
expanding into a different frequency, or you're going in a different route, and they just don't get it.
Mhm.
There's so many
Yes.
people that happens all the time, but that's something that most women that I've worked, because I just work with women, most
Mhm.
women that come up against something, it's speaking to them. They need to do something. It's
Yep.
their own internal fear based upon the subconscious stuff, right? You have to deal with that anyway.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
to pile on that, then you've got the people that are around you that have been around you in the bubble that you're in now, which is too small, obviously, because you're wanting to get out.
Mhm.
That's all the life. That's the only platform that you have and foundation that you have to operate off of.
So true.
So if you're saying, I want to jump off of this foundation, most of the people on there going, what are you, nuts? Or they're going, I don't get it. Fine, but
Yeah.
whatever. There's only a
Add to
right.
that being at the top of that mountain,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And it
Yeah. At the
really
top,
doesn't
and
make
thinking,
sense.
right. And thinking, what is she doing? Which brings up my next question to you.
Yeah.
How did you being a mom, a
Hmm.
family,
Hmm.
an important breadwinner in your
Yeah.
dynamic, your family dynamic,
Yep.
how did you reconcile I always call it keeping it 1 foot in the big responsible world and then 1 foot in your own because you know where
Yeah.
you need to go. So how did you handle the financial responsibility at the same time you're trying to
Uh,
redefine and go in the direction that you feel intuitively that you need to go?
yeah, I didn't have the luxury of just jumping off the cliff because I was providing for my family.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I had to sit. That's so uncomfortable in a transition. The thing I'm leaving isn't bad. I don't have to make it bad. It doesn't have to be bad for me to also know that it's time to move on. That being said, I had to really take my foot off of one accelerator while pushing on the other. I couldn't just do a drastic shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very gradual doing a little less and doing a little more, saying no and then saying yes. But it took probably 5 years.
How important is patience in all that?
It was so hard.
I know,
Even
right?
I can feel it I'm like feeling it in my body even as I'm talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because on certain days, this is what it reminds me of in yoga sometimes, the place in between poses where if I don't know where the teacher is guiding me and my foot is in the air and it's traveling and she hasn't said where it's supposed to land, feels eternal.
It does, right?
Feels eternal. And my brain wanted to make it all bad. It wanted to, but here's the truth of leaving anything, a relationship, a career, a business, a job, a location, is that it's never all bad. That also doesn't mean it's not time to go.
Mm-hmm. It in the process of being where you were at and the
Hmm.
journey that you made after that,
Yeah.
there's always it's always a leverage. It's a balancing act between the fear and where you feel as though intuitively that you want to go or what you want in life, and you had a goal that you
Yep.
wanted to get to. How did you balance the fear? Because
Mhm.
that's another thing that's a big misnomer. Women that are going through transitions like this is
Yes.
that they're like, once I get past and I get clear, then everything's good and I'm fired up and I'm going and there's no fear and I'm like all
Mhm.
confident. No, that's not how it works.
I'm
It's
still
it's
scared for the
right.
record.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We all are. That's the
Yes.
point. It's not something where you get to a destination and then everything's cool and easy. In fact,
Mhm.
it could be more difficult,
Yep.
but it's
I
about the worth of the journey. So how did you balance the fear along
Yeah.
with your vision?
Well, I will say I'm not a huge fan of people doing the quantum huge leap. I still had a lot of income and still have income from business that I
Mhm.
created before. I could not have built what I've built in the business I'm running now without that financial stability. It would have been for me and my need for safety and security in financial spaces, particularly, too big of a leap. That's why the transition had to be slow. Some people have a higher tolerance for that kind of leap. I find that people who have had nothing at some point in their life have a higher tolerance for the huge financial risk. I
Mhm.
have low tolerance. I haven't ever had nothing, and I'm really not interested in it.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not
it's not a good place to be, trust me.
no,
Yeah.
I'm really not interested in financial struggle, and so I knew that's partially why the transition needed to be slow, that the foundation of financial stability was really important to me. When people move from this is another place, a traditional job into an entrepreneurial space,
Mhm.
or even like a commission based role where your income is dependent upon your performance and it fluctuates. I've seen that take the most capable people out
Yeah.
because all of the subconscious habits of thinking that were there and buried because you didn't need to deal with them come raging to the surface in that sort of a transition.
Mhm.
And it's for real when that financial pressure is there and there's a need and then you're having to perform and it is
Yeah.
It's for real. So I'm not a fan of putting the discomfort too high for people who haven't already been accustomed to that kind of risk. Like I said, I have one friend in particular. He grew up with nothing. He takes huge business risks. All the
Is he have a family? Does he really?
Yes.
And he still does that, huh?
Yes, and he lands on his feet. It's
Yeah.
his way of
That's his
moving through the
gig. Right.
world,
No.
but I'm his polar opposite. I'm a millimeter by
Yeah.
millimeter. Let's make the wise, slow choice. I like a lot of safety and security. I want the pace to be slow. I don't think either is good or bad. It's, do you know
Right.
yourself? And are you building a business that sort of reflects that and honors that in you?
That's the point. That's the main
Yes.
point. And but the way social media is and the way that it's
Ugh,
out there, you can change your life in 6 weeks
no.
or 8 weeks or something. And then people get into it because they want to change their life. They have that notion of, I want to do something, I need to do something. And then they get into it and then it scares the crap out of them because that's not their gear. That's not the way that they do. And then they put themselves in this precarious, especially with a money narrative, a
Yep.
very precarious financial position. Then their whole money thing comes into their head and it completely locks them up.
Yep.
And then they have to
Absolutely.
go back. And then so it's 5 steps back. And then you take another crappy job. And then
Mm,
you feel even worse about yourself. And you pick up the other hammer and you start hammering
yes.
yourself. The most interesting thing about your journey
Mhm.
is how you balanced things. How
Mm,
it's as a mom, more
mm.
specifically, because you've got your responsibilities at home and be one of the caretakers of your family.
Yep.
It, and at the same time, you're taking on another job. So
Yes.
essentially, you have two jobs and
Mhm.
still are being a mom at the
Mhm.
home, taking care of the house. I'm
Yep.
sure you and your husband have a great house relationship back and forth, but you're doing all of that stuff.
Yep.
How did you balance that?
I didn't do 2 jobs. I got rid of 20% over here and added 20% over here.
Oh, okay. So that's a good way to do it.
Because here's the thing, I think of emotional energy as my most valuable commodity, especially in the kind of work I do. Meaning, like your phone, you start with a full charge every day of emotional, spiritual energy. And throughout the day, you're withdrawing from that, and the battery is going down. The work of acquiring clients, the work of holding space for people, which is what I do, there are a lot of things that take emotional energy, meeting new people, social interaction. Things that take emotional energy that we don't account for enough are like grief, therapy work, any kind of healing, physical or emotional, takes a ton of energy.
Mhm.
So I like to think of my energy as the thing I'm watching most closely. Here's the other thing, I don't have the luxury of using all my energy during the workday, because when I'm done, there's a whole group of people that are my most important people that I need to
Exactly.
have energy for at the end of the day or
Mhm.
whenever that is. So I've got to make sure, like, I could do way more client calls time wise than what I do. I can't energy wise, and then still be able to be the mom and the wife and the community member and the volunteer and all the other things that are important to me. But I'm not just creating a career, I'm creating a whole life. I've just always had this really good gauge of, I don't have the luxury of coming home fully depleted. There's got to be leftover enough that I give my best. Because if I build this big, amazing, awesome business, all the big things that we get sold out there, but I fail for those people closest to me, I'm not interested.
Mm.
I'm out.
Which
I'm
is
out.
one of the biggest problems that with women when they want to do something and they want to be entrepreneurial, they expand
Yes.
themselves and get into that, because then it's the balancing. How do I do it? How do I do it? I think
Yes.
your approach in terms of the energy
Mm,
balance is great.
yeah.
I think because that's it. That's what it is, isn't it?
Totally. One other thing that I work a lot on with women is setting goals, having goals that have boundaries. So we think of boundaries as just being relational, and it is, but we have a relationship with our goals, with our ambition, with our careers, with our businesses. And if you set a goal and you don't take into account the fullness of your life, it is bound to fail, just as a relationship without boundaries is bound to fail. So let me give you an example. My personal goal, and I write about this a lot in my book, these goals with boundaries, is to work like a teacher. So I'm going to work from Monday through Friday, 8 to 3-ish, and then weekends off, summer's light, that kind of thing, but get paid like a CEO. Now, if I had just the goal of getting paid like a CEO, I have no boundaries. I could just work 80 hours a week, right?
Mhm.
But I'll tell you, when the rubber hits the road, I had an amazing call with a potential new client. She was my people. I was like, oh, I want to work with this person. At the end of the call, she said, I don't even need to talk to my husband. This is a yes for me. And then I said, okay, let's schedule your first call. And she said, great. The only time I can meet with you is after 6 p.m. during the week.
Oh,
So then I said, I'm going to need to sleep on it because it was too fast for me to say no to think about. But I had to come back to her and say, if I say yes and I don't have the boundary, it undermines all the work I do. Is there any way you can meet during lunch? No, no. Then it's just a no for me.
when you
That's
said,
hard.
oh God, yes, especially when you get somebody that you dial into and you're like, this would be the
And
because
it's
you,
the money. You're walking
yeah,
away from money that's
yeah,
real, right?
yeah,
That would impact my family
exactly.
positively. When you really get to the nitty gritty of boundaries, there's loss there. There's
Hmm.
also peace there and
Hmm.
freedom there.
Oh yes, very much. Boundaries are so important. So
Hmm.
when somebody comes
Yeah.
into you, let's say different scenarios, but
Yeah.
you have a mom that comes
Hmm.
into you, you have somebody that's single and up and coming. Should they prioritize the most important things in their lives
Mm.
first and then create boundaries? Because it seems like you did that with your family as the priority
Yeah.
in terms of the most important, because let's be honest, the most important thing in the whole world is relationships. That's it,
Yes.
period. But for a lot of people, especially people that are dealing with a lot of stuff,
Mm.
it's more about merit and it's more about
Mm.
things that from exterior like reinforcement in terms of worth.
Yep.
So they put themselves first, and you do that all the time, right? Look around. They let everything else go. They let their families go, their friends. It's transactional, the relationships, and they ultimately end up with a lot of money or successful, but they're miserable. And so, do you work with your clients in terms of you can't force something, right? I never
Hmm.
force, and even back in the therapy days, the one-on-ones
Yep.
and stuff, you can't force what somebody's priorities are, but you can certainly get them to understand really what they should be. So, is that part of
Yes.
your process?
I think it's more just it happens naturally and
Hmm.
organically as you're talking with someone, those are revealed. You discover what their priorities are. I find for the most case, women have taken that narrative of people who have a lot of money and are successful, have horrible family lives. And I think that's true in certain cases, but I know an equal amount of people who have a lot of money and are really successful who have awesome family lives.
Hmm. Hmm.
And but what women do is they shy away from all of the money and success because they feel like it will be a detriment. And what I want to say is
Hmm.
you can have the ambition, you can have the family, but the goals have to take the family and the whole picture into account.
Exactly.
You've got to really consider that in your ambition. You can't just let the ambition run wild. I also have to know it's important that I'm at my kids' basketball games to me. It's important that I'm present before and after school to me. Doesn't mean it has to be for everyone, but for
Hmm.
me, that's important.
Hmm.
And so it's finding out that is a self discovery and it's revealed along the way how you want to. But the restriction of that can also birth a lot of creativity. When you only have 6 hours to work,
Yeah.
you work on what's most important.
Yeah, you
I
do. It's
mean,
a level of urgency if you have
yes.
that. That does make good. See, you're talking to a guy that did his term paper like the night before finals. The timing thing is an important thing in terms
Yeah.
of what the expectations are. I want to be rich. I want to retire when I'm 35 type of a thing
Yes.
versus looking at it as a life component.
Yes. And there's a reason that I just wrote my book last year because I was raising little people. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the capacity. I will also say if you are a mom of little tiny humans, Oh, I wish someone would have said this to me, that it is just a season. Like, it feels forever when you're in it. But
Mhm.
right now, the amount of freedom and time I have is so different than what it was even 5 years ago. It's wow, I can do
Yeah.
so many things now that I just didn't have the capacity for. I maybe had the time, but I didn't have the energy for it
Yeah.
in years past. So, if right now isn't the season where you can create the huge, monstrous, big, successful thing, it's okay. Create what you can with what you have. Keep taking steps, keep working at it, keep honing your skill. There will come a time where you will have more capacity. So that would have felt really good to me at certain points along the way.
Isn't it amazing? Because every person I'm in the same boat you are, because my
Mm,
daughter's now 34 and I've got grandkids and she's off and doing her thing. And it's funny because when she went off to college, I looked around, I'm like, what do I do? I got all this space. I mean,
so
this is
true.
crazy, right? It's just,
Yes.
and that happens. And you're like, well, okay. In that there's a narrative that they're like, where it's an identity narrative, especially with women.
Mm,
When all of a sudden they are a mom, then that's their identity and they take
yeah.
on that identity. And a lot of times that's very limiting, or there's an essential loss of yourself in that, depending upon how much you put into that.
That word identity is so important. And where you're finding your identity, even for just working moms or working people, where you are not what you're doing, you are not that role, right? That
Mm-hmm.
identity being attached to what you do is always dangerous.
Always.
It is so dangerous when your performance is connected to like your value, your hands are clasped together, you cannot create what you are supposed to create because there's too much risk of loss in it if your identity is attached to it. And then if you think about it from a parenting perspective, the goal is that they leave.
It
So
is,
then
this
what?
should be,
Like,
right. But what happens is when the
it's
identity
not the
becomes
goal.
motherhood, then when they leave, there's an existential crisis because now
Is
they don't know who they are.
And then you become resentful that they don't leave.
Yeah. And it's such a
It's a
double-edged sword. You're
yes.
setting yourself up for absolute failure. When I have moms as
Mm.
clients and they come in, one of the big issues is they've given up their identity to just being a mom. And for the record, as I was a single dad, and it takes a full commitment to be a parent. If you do it the
Oh,
right way, I feel as though, but
it's the
it doesn't.
hardest job in the
Right.
world.
It is,
Mhm.
but it's obviously the most rewarding too. For me, I can speak
Yep.
for myself, but in that process, it's very easy to lose yourself.
Yes.
Very.
It's
And
all consuming at times, and
yeah,
so it's a slippery slope to slide into.
yes.
No judgment if you have, by the way.
And
No
that's
judgment because
right.
it's
Exactly.
very easy to do, and a lot of the messaging around parenting now, I even talk to my mom sometimes, and she'll often say, "You all are making this parenting thing way too complicated." Like, the expectations are
Yeah.
ramped up so high. She's,
They,
"If you were fed and in bed and had clothes and we were feeling like we were doing a good job. You have all this added expectation of monitoring their every move. Just
yeah.
it's a lot more, there's a lot higher pressure on parents and that role. And I think that's led to the identity piece as well. So,
100%. It
yeah.
makes it 100 times worse. Let's finish up with,
Okay.
can you give a quick talk about what you offer, what your program is,
Yeah.
and what your book is about?
Sure. I'll start with the book. I think of ICU, that's the title of the book, as the foyer to my business. You can walk in the front door and look around. It has been described to me by my clients as that it feels like a coaching session with me feels. And so it's a good taste for you to explore this idea of habits of thinking. What is a habit of thinking? How is it impacting you and your work and your life? In addition, there is a free assessment. So the Habit Finder itself is free. It's available on my website, which is my name, amykemp.com. So amykemp.com. And it is a snapshot, like a picture of your subconscious habits of thinking as they exist right now. If I could unzip your brain and just look inside there and see what's going on. So those are the two easiest places to just enter into my world and into this work of the subconscious mind.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Amy, thank you so much. I really appreciate
You're welcome.
your time and your expertise on this. And so you're at Amy Kemp. How did you get amykemp.com? That's
Oh,
awesome.
years of pursuit. Years of pursuit.
That is awesome. God, I wish I could.
Uh-huh.
Now I have TonyDufresne.com, but it's because nobody can spell my last name.
That's true.
And I'm surprised nobody did it like as a mistake. Like they type a regular name and they type mine. So
No,
that's
it
why
took
I
me
also
3 years of every 3
bet.
months reaching out to get
Really?
it. Yes, but I
Really?
persist until I succeed.
Good for you. See that? There you go. There's an example right there of your mentality, your mindset, your program. That's awesome.
Yes.
You can, my other one is theconfidencedoc.com, and you can find my website there. I also have a toxic relationship micro mini course because nobody likes to be in that at all. And gaslighting, that's no fun, right? If you have any comments or questions for me, it's Tony@theconfidencedoc.com as usual. Again, thanks, Amy, so much. That was amazing. And we will see you next week.